So these are the band members. There's still one more. Hermeto's son, Fabio Pascoal, on percussion. So you have Jovino Santos Neto playing the comping piano. Hermeto was taking the solos and playing the melody, along with Carlos Malta on sax and flute. And Carlos is just like insane virtuoso and the funniest guy in the world. I mean, just absolutely hysterical. Itiberê Zwarg on bass. Does not sound like a Brazilian name, but Itiberê is an indigenous name. I mentioned before, Itiberê has his own orchestra, Orquestra Familia, which is astounding, incredible music. And then Márcio Bahia on drums and Fabio Pascoal on percussion. This was the band. And before I go into kind of like Hermeto's chord symbol notation, I just want to talk a little bit about how this band rehearsed, and I'll use some statements from band members themselves rather than my own statements. Some of these statements are in Portuguese, so I'm translating on the fly. So if there's some sentence structure, word orders that don't sound English, is because I'm basically transliterating. This band rehearsed Monday to Friday from 2 to 8 p.m. every week, whether they had a gig or not. And they played in Hermeto's house on the second floor, in his house in Jabourg, which is about 45 minutes outside of Rio. Kind of a quiet, funky town. And they all lived very close by, because the band needed to live close by when you have that kind of commitment. And what would happen is that Hermeto would be in his den on the first floor, and then he'd go upstairs and he would slip the music underneath the door. And the guys were there like mice waiting for cheese. Oh, a new piece from Hermeto. And usually the whole score would kind of be written out, and his handwriting was really hard to read. As you'll see when you see some of his manuscripts, it's really difficult to read sometimes. And so what they did was that they copied their parts out for themselves so that they could work from it. And then once they had cleaned up all their own parts, then the band would start rehearsing, and even from the den he could hear mistakes, and he would scream up to them, "No, Jovino, so menor." You know, he would be screaming, you know, the mistakes that they're making and everything like that. And then eventually he'd come upstairs and they would play the tune. So this kind of work ethic was amazing. And I want to go to a statement by Itiberê, the bassist, that kind of tells you how he worked on things. And I'm just kind of translating here. What would happen is, I'll just translate from Itiberê. Hermeto was called O Campeão, which means the champion. He was called O Campeão. He always would, during the morning, they would practice their individual parts before the afternoon rehearsal. And then Hermeto, after lunch, then they would join together, and then he would teach everybody, you know, their parts. He would start first with piano and bass, and everybody's like checking it out. Everybody's listening to just piano and bass, really trying to wrap their heads around what's going on. And then, you know, then they would add from there piano, then drums and percussion at the end. Saxophone, depending on what kind of line was being played, saxophone would be added in there somewhere in the middle as well. But it was this layering concept where they would play on a groove for like 2 hours just to get the groove. You know what I'm saying? That's just how dedicated this group was. And many times, and I'm quoting Itiberê again, And so he was asked in an interview, you know, the rehearsal process and the creation of music, is it improvised composition or is it improvisation written out? And so Itiberê basically talks about how Hermeto would play the parts for people on their instruments. He played all the saxophones. He played drums. He played guitar. He played piano. He played flute. He played everything. He made up his own instruments. He uses a teapot. He makes instruments out of anything. So what he would essentially be doing is building the arrangement layer by layer. And that was one of the ways in which certain pieces took shape. And what's really great about it is that he didn't want the musicians to be just human sequencers. He wanted them to have a creative role in the formation of a piece. So, and I'm kind of quoting Hermeto when he's talking about the role of the musicians in his band. And he's saying that, you know, when I invite a new band member to join, they have to have some good musical foundation, but they also have to feel that they don't really know anything yet. And so with that in mind, he would basically invite the musician to play things their way, even though he was showing them the parts. He wanted them to personalize it so that the music would take shape and that eventually he was empowering each of these musicians to create themselves. And if I go to an interview with Jovino, which I did on the phone not long ago, it's wonderful how he talks about the compositional process. And let me see if I can find this over here. Yeah, the legacy of the composers from his band is called the Árvore, or the tree of composers. If there was, and so I asked him, if there was one main lesson you learned as a composer from being in the band, what would it be? And Jovino said, the music is there already. You just have to turn on the faucet. You're not creating, you're tapping into a place where the music is there all the time. You just have to turn it on and it starts flowing. With Hermeto, it's on all the time. The Western idea of composer as inventor or experimenter, Hermeto never saw himself in this way. He never knew exactly where things would go. He thought that if you catch the first idea in your head, that's usually the best one. So this idea that the music is always there, it's very empowering, isn't it? I mean, it's very possible, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But with Hermeto, I mean, he would write tunes in the back of a cab. Matter of fact, one of the tunes we're going to hear a little later, Candango, he wrote in the back of a cab on the way to a gig. So it's really, there's been, you know, theses, you know, doctoral dissertations in Brazil written on this band. I mean, I culled through lots of materials and tried to pull together some anecdotes like this just to give you an idea of just what the work ethic was. And here it's like, you know, Lynn's telling me, well, man, I gave these guys these tunes and they didn't even practice them. I mean, if you were in Hermeto's band and you showed up and you weren't prepared, forget it. Forget it. You just wouldn't be in the band. And you would never let it get to that point because everybody knew that they were experiencing something rare in life.